few weeks ago on a Friday evening, I tried to do an interactive Torah quiz, which I'm afraid didn't go down particularly well with either those in the sanctuary, all 5 of them, I think, or those online, despite an array of technology sitting on my desk in front of me so that I could monitor both the Zoom and the YouTube chat. I have to say, all the technology worked that night, miraculously. And you weren't there, Igor. It would be foolhardy of me to attempt anything like it again in this hybrid fashion. But I am tempted to ask just one more question, but I think I've answered it myself. To those of you here and those online, where else in Jewish tradition, apart from in today's Torah portion from Deuteronomy, do we find the verse, Arami Oved Avi, a wandering Aramean was my father? If I could see your answers, I think you would all say that it is one of the central texts of the Pesach Haggadah, and it's used in the Haggadah as a scaffolding for a series of imaginative and sometimes didactic rabbinic midrashim on the nature of oppression, on identity, and God's redemptive acts. It is central because it tells the story that we commemorate at the festival of Pesach, and on the first night in particular, the descent into Egypt, slavery, oppression, God's strong hand and outstretched arm that sends the plagues upon Egypt and rescues the Israelites from their bondage. By the way, what is interesting about the Haggadah, the passage that's quoted in the Haggadah, is that it stops there with coming out of Egypt. It does not go on to mention going into the land flowing with milk and honey. And my teacher, Rabbi Professor Jonathan Maganat, always said that when you look at the cycle of the pilgrim festivals, Pesach we start in Egypt, at Shavuot we receive the Torah, at Sukkot we are wandering in the desert. This is what these 3 pilgrim festivals symbolize and commemorate. And then after Sukkot, we're back in Egypt. We don't have a biblical festival that celebrates going into the land. Why was it so important for the Israelite farmer bringing his first fruits to the temple on Shavuot to tell this compact story that had taken place generations before he had been born? To whom was he relating it? To deal with this second question first, he acknowledges before God that he's entered the land that God had sworn to his ancestors to give to them. This raises all kinds of questions. Why does God need to hear these words? If God is omniscient, all-knowing, doesn't God, who has been after all a significant participant in past events, already know the past, just as the future, surely, must already be known and disclosed to the divine mind? Whom are we really talking to when we address our prayers to God? Perhaps we should also assume that the farmer who brings his fruits is not alone. He may come with his family. Undoubtedly, there are other pilgrims queuing up to offer their first fruits, a crowded courtyard, everyone jostling for space, just as in the photographs one sees when thousands of Muslims make their annual pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, same word in Hebrew, Chag, pilgrimage. And the priest must have been nearby, ready to take the basket of fruits and to listen to what seems like a confession or a litany of events that stretch back to the wandering Aramean, whoever that wandering Aramean was, Abraham, Jacob, or Laban, as the Haggadah interprets the phrase, ending with the Israelites' entry into the land flowing with milk and honey. Alice Shalvey is a prominent German-born, English-educated Israeli academic, who founded the Israel Women's Network and who transformed the education and opportunities for girls and women in Israel through the establishment of Pelech, an experimental school for religious girls that taught Talmud. Now in her 90s, she has been honored and celebrated both in Israel and worldwide, and her very readable autobiography, Never a Native, conveys her lifelong passion for learning, literature, and Jewish values to be transmitted to the next generation of young people growing up in Israel. In a commentary to this week's Torah portion, she reflects on the role of ritual and ceremony as we mark the numerous transitions that punctuate our lives: birth, bar or bat mitzvah, marriage, conversion, moving into a new house, the beginning of a new year, or as in our Torah portion, entering the land of Israel, which she connects with the aliyot of the early settlers at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, as well as the Declaration of Independence drawn up by the founders of the new state in 1948. Almost the entire book of Deuteronomy, she writes, is a reprise, not only of the events of the 40 years in the wilderness, but also of the commandments first encapsulated in the giving of the Decalogue at Sinai. Now in Ki Tavo and the passages that follow, the time has come to look toward the entry into the new home, to review the covenant, and to rededicate oneself individually and as a people by first acknowledging the fact that God has fulfilled the promise given to our forebears. This is to be immediately followed, she says, by an expression of awareness of past suffering, not necessarily one's own, but that of the collective. And this is the phrase that I found most striking and moving in the context of our service this morning, as we witnessed little Ada's welcome into our community and the service of affirmation and formal entry into the Jewish community that you, Louise and Isabella, are about to celebrate. This is what Shalvi says: remembrance of things past is an essential part of developing a new identity, beginning a new existence. The formulation of this memory of the first fruits ceremony, with its reference to the fugitive or wandering Aramean, surely stirs within the modern reader recollections of the trials and tribulations of Jews in the diaspora, which culminated in the unprecedented horrors of the Holocaust. She's not here at the moment, but little Ada's ancestry combines the Englishness of her mother, Ella, with her father's Egyptian parentage and birth. I wonder what she will make of the story of our ancestors' sojourn in Egypt. How will she conjure with her multiple and rich identities, both inherited and formed for herself? Remembrance of things past is an essential part of developing a new identity. Ada will learn about the wandering Aramean, about slavery in Egypt, the 10 plagues, and our freedom. And these stories and the lessons that we learn from them will stimulate her to create her own identity and to understand that she is not the child of Pharaoh's taskmasters, but the descendant of a people who stood at Sinai in no man's land, neither in Egypt nor in Israel. Her own courageous and happy temperament will undoubtedly help her to overcome the challenges that face her in the future. And I hope that in time, her Jewish faith and pride in her Judaism will bring her comfort and strength. And for you, Louise and Isabella, reclaiming the ancestry of your father, your grandfather, Isabella, and of your grandmother, Louise, whose influence over you ensured an almost unbroken and faithful link to your Jewish identity, the remembrance of things past, traditions, Shabbat, festivals, food, Yiddish, and your father's own story of exodus and wandering has been an essential part of developing more deeply for both of you a more confident and knowledgeable Jewish identity. In a few moments, you will stand like the pilgrim at the temple in Jerusalem in ancient times and declare before God your acceptance of the responsibilities that are now formally placed upon you as Jews, and something of your own story. As witnesses to this declaration, here in the sanctuary with you and online, may we too renew and deepen our own commitment to Jewish life, for it is through remembrance of things past that we begin a new existence, as we all will in less than 10 days at Rosh Hashanah. The act of remembrance, zikaron in Hebrew, embraces memory of the past, but also our resolve to observe and cherish the commitment to a new life, enhancing our spiritual lives through prayer and ritual observance, and to uphold the moral teachings of the Torah that require us to behave towards others, and particularly those whose lives have been disrupted so violently in recent days, with integrity, kindness, and generosity. Kein yehi ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.